And of course.
I don't know what the 2-minute timer is. We always just go live. Can they hear us?
Yep. Good evening or good morning, depending on where in the world you are. Today, in this episode of Rapido Live, we're going to be here with Jeff, the co-host, and we're going to talk about probably nutrition, if I had to guess. But today, I have got probably about 30 or 40 questions that you guys have submitted, and we're gonna pick some brains, and we're gonna do some talking, and we're gonna see what we can figure it out. Jeff, how the heck are you?
I'm good. I mean, sorry I missed the previous, and I was on my annual trek across the U.S., 18 days, 8,600 miles, 14 states, about 30 people seen. So anyway, it was good. It was good. I got to see all those flyover states that people take airplanes to miss. So, and there's a lot of good stuff there. So I was happy.
Looking at some of the pictures that I saw you post on Facebook, I mean, if anything, it was a good sightseeing trip.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go ahead and get this disclaimer out of the way, and we're gonna start looking at some questions. All the information discussed in this interview is intended for historical, entertainment, and educational purposes only. None of this information is intended for any illegal purposes. All opinions are that of the respective individuals, and all rights reserved. All right. All the information discussed in this interview. A lot of the questions that I got had to do with feed. Literally tons of them. So the first one that I want to ask, it's a couple of parts in the question, and I think it may answer quite a bit of people's questions. And guys, if y'all want to throw some in the comments, if y'all have some, feel free to do that too. The first question that I got is, what are the overall effects of feeding better feed? And this person wants a deep dive from a microbiological standpoint.
I mean, It's a great question. And, not enough people ask this question. So this is a really great question. And here's the thing, right? When you're reading your tag, the less things that are byproducts or the more ingredients that you recognize, corn, right? Soybeans, wheat, barley. So the more ingredients that you can actually identify without looking them up in an encyclopedia, the better the feed. And when you make the shift over to whole feed or, a feed that comes from real grains, real proteins, things like that, everyone who has done this has said they've reduced their feed by 20 to 25%. And you were actually one of those people, Carrie, right? You started feeding real feed. It took me almost a year to convince you that all feed was not created equal. You took the jump, you
You're
tried
right.
real feed, right? And you were like, holy shit, is this really? I mean, they're not cleaning up everything I give them. They look better than they've ever looked before, right? And you're down to about 2.5 ounces of feed, 2.5 ounces of feed, and they still look good. And if you feed them anymore, they're going to get fat. True?
So, like for me now, my large fowl get between 2.5 to 3 ounces a day. My game fowl, 2 ounces. Anything over that, and they're fat. Like they'll get mushy when you pick them up and feel them. And one of the things that I've learned is you want to feel your birds to know what they should feel like, especially an athletic bird. If you got an athlete, you need to know what it feels like. And, when you look at an athlete, you see muscles, you see tone, you see depth, you see width, and you feel that in your birds. And when I was trying to feed, I was like, well, everything says 4 ounces a day. Well, that is right for the crap on the shelf. But when you start feeding a complete feed, if you feed more than two, it's going to get fat for a game fowl. And I thought at first I started with supplement, and I was adding supplement and oil, and that was great. It worked good. I saw the results. I saw that I was feeding less feed, and then one day I just, in that quest for betterness, I didn't realize that I was going to wind up with my own feed company. But you know, if you want to feed something that's good, you have a nutritionist friend of yours give you a recipe. So these are the birds I'm feeding. He sends you a recipe, and you open it up, and it smells like something I'd want to put in a bag or a bowl and put some milk and eat it.
Yeah. It should look and smell and really taste basically like a really good granola cereal. Okay. That's what great chicken feed looks like. So,
And I can pronounce everything on the tag.
yeah. Yeah. If we go back to the original question, the other thing that you're seeing benefit and, from that microbiology type of deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Um, when you're dealing with real grains, whole grains, no byproducts, no fillers, no floor sweepings, and then you put, a really good cocktail, if you will, or blend of probiotics in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you can take it to another level, right? So guys understand the probiotics that are going into things like the supplement or the NutriBalance or other really good feeds. Okay, their purpose is not direct for the chicken. So their purpose is they get wet, they come to life. Okay. And they start feeding on the carbohydrates and they start feeding on in of the grain, right? So they start breaking down the grain, the fibers, the fats, the carbohydrates, and all the components of the grain and make it more simple for your chicken to absorb it. Okay. Breaks it down
Mm-hmm.
quicker, gets into the bloodstream quicker. Here's the other bonus that a lot of people don't even understand about probiotics is probiotics, when they live and then they die off, they become food for many other bacteria that naturally live in the digestive tract of the chicken. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So dead bacteria or dead yeast cells or dead lactobacillus cells, okay, those are now, because they're fat and plump because they just fed on the grains before your chicken absorbed it, and now they're going to feed the naturally occurring, the beneficial bacteria that already live in your chicken's gut. Okay, so that's where you get the immune system push, you know, and you see the benefit on the health side. The first benefit you see is from better feed utilization. Okay, you're going to get better feed breakdown. Chicken's going to be healthier, needs less feed, the whole bit. The secondary is actually supporting the immune system by feeding the bacteria in the chicken's gut. So it's like, it's a win-win. So when I'm looking at a label, people send me labels every day, every day. Hey, Jeff, what do you think of this feed? Hey, Jeff, what do you think of this feed? Right. And, I'm looking at the ingredient list, and as soon as I see one or two byproducts, I'm pretty turned off. And if I don't see probiotics, if I don't see live living bacteria at the bottom, they'll be at the end of the ingredient list. I'm like, dude, keep looking. This is not what you want. Yep,
Right.
it's cheap, and it's cheap for a reason. So, you can feed 4 ounces of, $20 feed, or you can feed 2 ounces of $40 feed. You spent the same amount of money. Okay. Quit
And I
looking at
think
the price per
that's what a
bag.
lot of people don't realize
Yeah.
is
They
the
don't do the
math is
math,
math.
right?
Yeah.
They just look at the price per bag and they go from there. But all right, what else you got?
All right. One of the other questions says, what are some observable differences that you can expect when you switch to a better feed? And I think we covered that
We did.
in
We did.
feeding less
Yeah.
and
But when,
spending the same.
yeah, right. But, a lot of the guys that are listening tonight, and you're aware, I'm more of a fat feeder. So I want the oil in the feed, and
Yep.
I want that as my energy source, and I want to reduce the carbohydrates. And part of the reason why we're seeing brighter combs, that cherry red comb, and we're seeing brighter eyes and higher activity levels is we've reduced carbohydrates, we've increased the fats, and the chicken isn't working as hard to digest the energy that's going through the digestive tract. Okay.
Right.
Um, so there's better blood flow, there's better oxygen content in the blood when we can cut back on carbohydrates. So
And
that's the
one
only
of the
other thing I
biggest
would add to
things
that.
one of the biggest things that I hear people complain about when they talk about feeding a mash type or coarse mash feed is they gripe about the dust. Well, the way I get around that is I still add oil to my feed and they still eat it like candy. It's just it's already got everything mixed in there with it. Um how long or what would you say would be the shelf life of feed?
Oh man, I hate to really piss people off, but you know, ideally, I'll tell you what, the best performance I've ever seen ever with chickens is feed that is made every week, fresh feed made every week. Okay, and I can
Mm-hmm.
feed even less, but the fresher that feed, the better the bird is, right? But the guys that are listening, there's no way to get feed that is 1 or 2 or even 3 weeks old. If you're buying bags off the shelf or at the local Tractor Supply or farm store, a good chance it's already a month old before you ever got there, right?
Right.
And before you picked it up. So it's tough, and most of the commercial feeds are putting preservatives and antioxidants on there, which some of those are not really healthy for the chicken. I mean, I'm kind of anti-preservative in my life. That's just how I am. But, not everybody has a choice. I live in a place where there's a dozen feed mills that'd be happy to make you a custom mix. And, some of them will make you as small as a 500-pound mix. Right? But that isn't West Coast. West Coast feed mills, if you can't get 3 tons, they don't want to talk to you about a custom feed. So
Right.
there's just not enough competition out there. And I think they have their head up their butt, but that's just my opinion.
I mean, money's money, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, other than Chino Gonzalez down in Chowchilla, nobody's going to make you a 500-pound mix, right? But I keep pushing people towards Chino because he's got awesome feed formulas. I mean, I'm prejudiced because I made them for him, right? I know what's in them, and I know how they
Yeah.
perform, right?
Right.
But excuse my French, all the cheap bastards in California won't spend money for good feed. So, just let them keep doing what they're doing. But
Yeah.
when it comes to feed in California, he's the man.
All right. So tell me this: how does climate and soil, like what they have in the Philippines versus what they have in America, affect the grains and local made feed?
Well, the biggest thing there is going to be the climate. The soil part of it is the bacteria and the viruses that have built up in the soil over the years, and
Mm-hmm.
they live in that warmer temperature with high humidity. They can grow, live, and survive in the soil for much longer than they do here in the States. Most of the states has freezing temperatures, right? We're not typically as humid as the Philippines. So it is drastically different. But I think everybody needs to hear that, if you live in Alaska, your feed formulation should be different than a person living in Texas or Mississippi. Okay.
Right.
And, if you're buying Cargill, Purina, Tucker Milling, God don't strike me down for saying that, or any of these other commercial brands, okay, they're shipping the same formula, whether you live in Pennsylvania or California or Texas. Okay, it's one formula fits all.
Yeah.
And when you can fine tune a chicken feed, especially for show or athletic poultry, when you can fine tune it based on the climate, holy cow! I mean, you start, okay. It's little things, but for somebody who can see, who can really observe the differences, it's huge when you can dial it in for the climate. I mean, it seems small, but you know, the energy level, the muscular build of the bird, everything can be fine tuned, and it's hard to explain unless you've seen it. But like the feed formula I made for you in Alabama for your games is not what I make for a feed formula for games in Pennsylvania or even further north. So
Yeah, because they have different
energy,
climates.
yep, energy level is going to be different. Um, everything's not the same. So you know, building in compensators for climate. Um, it's not only climate. Um, guys on here listening, and I've made recommendations to many of the guys here, and so I actually listen to their story, where they're from, what kind of breed they have, what kind of housing they have, whether they're on cords, whether they're on pens, right? And all that goes into my head as I'm making a recommendation, because a
Mm-hmm.
bird on a cord is way more active than a bird in a pen, right?
Yeah.
And what's the primary goal? And most of the time, my primary goal is to give you the best breeders, right? So you get the best hatching eggs, you get the most amount of eggs, you get the most really good hatching eggs. Your roosters are really healthy, so you have more fertile eggs, the whole bit, right? So I
Yeah.
focus a lot more on the breeding side. But that goes hand in hand with, the muscular side of it and, keeping them in good fit. Because if a cock gets too heavy, he's not going to reproduce right. He
Mhm.
might look like he's doing the job, but if he gets fat around his testicles, his percent of semen or sperm coming out is very
Yeah,
low.
fertility will go down.
Yeah. Same thing happens for a hen. She gets too much fat around her ovaries. She's not going to function, So, learning that feel, making sure your gut fat's right, making sure your body fat's right. And,
When they get too
especially,
fat, they won't even lay like they're supposed to. The hens
no,
won't.
they won't. They won't.
Mm. Okay. Next question. Feeding 2.5 ounce once a day is enough for chickens' daily intake? The short answer, yes. If that feed is nutritionally balanced for that bird, 2.5 ounces is enough. I've seen it, I've done it, and I do it every day. 2.5 ounces to grams is 70.
Yeah.
There's
70,
28
71.
grams. Yep,
Yeah.
28
There's
grams an ounce.
28.35 grams per ounce. And I just did the math while you were explaining, but yes, 2.5 ounce. Okay. 2.5 of really good feed is
Right,
enough. Okay.
right.
2.5 ounces of store bought garbage is not enough. Okay. That's
That's the
there. All
disclaimer
feed
on
is,
that.
yeah, all feed is not created equal. I can tell you that. And I know it for a fact. So, but yeah,
Is it better to feed twice a day or just once? And does feeding twice a day make the gizzard work more, or feeding the right size grit do the same thing as feeding twice a day?
when possible, I prefer feeding twice a day. I like to give only about 1/3 of their daily in the morning, just so they're not empty and it keeps the gizzard working. And then I would give 2/3 of it in the late afternoon, about an hour before sunrise. Again, the more I can keep the gizzard contracting and relaxing all day long, I think it gives the bird much better core strength and better health overall. Grit by itself is not going to take the place of that secondary feeding. Okay. So the
Yeah,
stimulation in the gizzard is more from the grain side.
right.
In a perfect world, it would be, like I said, maybe 3/4 of an ounce in the morning and the other ounce and a half, ounce and 3/4 in the afternoon would be really great. But that's it's not everybody can do it. So if you have a choice, feed in the afternoon. I prefer an afternoon feeding more than I do a morning feeding.
Let's see here. I'm gonna throw this one up. First, it's a hello from Texas, but the question soy or no soy has it's come up 3 or 4 times.
Honestly, it's personal preference. Um, if you're going to use soy, I would prefer you're using either like a full fat roasted soybean or an expelled soybean meal. But
Hmm.
both of those are not easy to get. But most soy on the market is actually solvent extracted. They use a chemical degreaser called hexane to release the oil from the soybean flesh. And that's how they make soybean meal as most of the world knows it. So, not a huge fan of that soybean meal. The birds will do okay on it. Um, the answer is probably some soy, but I'd still like, again, if you ask me to make you the perfect, rooster feed, I'm going to use some full fat soybeans. I'm probably going to use some field peas. And I'm going to mix it up. I definitely want a meat protein in there. the more choices of proteins that you can put in a feed,
Mm-hmm.
the healthier the bird's going to be. Same way with the grain, right? If I don't use all corn, if I use some cracked corn, I use some milo, I use some whole oats, I use some wheat or barley, the bird's going to be healthier. So the more diversity to the diet, the better off, the better off the bird's going to be and perform. But
All
it's
right.
not an option for everybody.
That's true. To get the kind of soybeans that you recommend, I actually have to get them sent to me by the ton.
Mm-hmm.
And because, that people in the South can relate to how hard it is to find good grains, which points out this next question. Does non-GMO grain have more nutrients than the GMO grain?
So the answer is not that there's more nutrients. Here's the thing. In a genetically modified or GMO grain, okay, they've taken a protein DNA out of a frog and they slammed its ass right into a protein molecule in the chromosome of the corn. Okay. And that's how the whole GMO thing got started. So when they changed the protein structure of the corn and the soy, um, it makes it less digestible. All right. So the bird has to work harder to digest it than it does with a non-GMO grain. So overall digestibility of non-GMO grains is slightly better. It is better. Um, what I worry about more are the spray residues because when they genetically modified the corn and the soybeans, they've increased the amount of sprays that they're using on those crops. And I worry
Mm-hmm.
about the residues of those sprays transferring through when the grain is being processed. And
Right.
those sprays can't be good. The liver's working hard, liver and spleen are working hard to clean that crap out of there. So it's, we're making them work for it. But again, not everybody has a choice. So I wish everybody could have perfect feed right in their backyard, but it ain't happening. So,
Joel says in the heat of the summer, it can be even less than 2.5 ounces.
that's true. But in the heat of the summer, when the birds want to eat a little bit less, I'd like to see the protein come up just a touch, right, to
Mm-hmm.
compensate, right?
Make sure they
So,
stay healthy.
yeah, like a 16, 17 in the winter is fine. And in the middle of the summer, I'd like to be 19 or 20 just to make sure they're getting what they need to keep them healthy. Okay.
See, here's another one. Feeding 2 ounces. Would that also include growing stags?
Now, anything that's still growing, everything that's under, like, say, 6 months of age, actually, yeah, you want them to always be able to get what they need, right? So I don't limit anything in the development stages. And then once you pen them up, once you have to catch them up and put them up, then you can start, putting them at that 2.5 ounces based on what they feel like. So when you pick them
Mm-hmm.
up, all right, you're holding them in your hand. You want to check them before you put them in the pen, right? If they're behind, we give them a little more. If they're, the biggest one of the bunch, then you can probably feed them the same amount you're feeding your stags or your cocks, and everybody will be happy. So you have to adjust that. Learning the feel of the bird until I went to the Philippines a year and a half ago, right? And Jen Ariata sat me down on a stool and he said, "Come on, we're going to go feel birds," right? After I've held hundreds of birds at the farm, you know, it, it, being there and doing it was huge, and learning the feel, right? Learning the density, not the
Mm-hmm.
squishiness, right? Feeling that denser weight. I'm not worried about the bird filling my hand. Okay. And too many guys say, "Oh, nice and full in my hand." I don't care. That's not what matters. How solid is that bird? What is the muscle density of that bird? How much fat is it carrying? Okay. That's what, you're looking at bird in the eye and you want to see how clear the eye is and see if there's any issues, listen close for any respiratory. I mean, when you pick those birds up, it isn't just to look at them and ooh and ah and just think about how nice they are. You need to be looking at them from head to tail and, looking for anything that, what's really good about the bird, what's not. Okay. And when you catch them up at 6 to 8 months old, whatever you catch them up, it's from free range. That's the time you really need to look hard and make your call decisions. Is that bird ever going to be something? Right. And, Jen taught me over there, he's looking at the straightness of the legs. So he holds the bird basically backwards, head towards him on his belly. And he'll take his fingers and he'll straighten that leg out. And he's looking at how straight that leg goes. And if it twists at all, if that leg ain't straight and it's got any twist to it at all, that bird goes to the cull pen. I mean, it's going basically to, it's not going to be used for breeding, and it's not going to be used for any type of a prize exhibition. Okay, ain't going to happen. It's going
Practice.
for secondary use. Yeah,
yeah. Next question we have says, seen some worming with pasta noodles soaked in the wormer. Good idea or no?
That's the first time I've heard that one. So I ain't going to BS you. I don't know. And I'm not good about wormers. Just to be honest with you, I'm pretty much an all natural kind of guy. I come at it. I try to avoid using chemicals, and commercial wormers as much as I can. I'm going to piss some people off, but I would tell you you should only think about worming twice a year, right? And it's right before you turn them out free range in the spring. For most of us, that's late March, early April, and do them again in the fall. When you're catching up and putting them away and cleaning up your pens, I'd do them again probably late September. Right now is a good time to do your worming, right? Before you go into winter. And that's, and there's natural ways around it, but it's too easy to go down to Tractor Supply and buy something and, put on their back or put in their feed or give them a shot. So, yeah.
This one I'm going to throw up by Steven. It says, Jeff, I know you made some custom feed for farms. What does that entail? Do you have the perfect recipe I can buy? I will say this, Steven, send Jeff a message and let him know your location and what grains you have available and give him some time and he will work something up. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. Here's another question. Anthony wants to know about acidified copper sulfate.
Yeah, acidified. There's two types of copper sulfate out there, and both work perfectly fine. Some people think they have to have the acidified, and some just use the regular. I have not seen any difference whatsoever. And, on paper, when I use them to make mineral mixes or feed mixes, they both work the same for me. Now, in Anthony's case, I'd probably check the water pH to see. So if the pH is high in the water that he's going to use the copper sulfate, then I would use the acidified. And if his pH is, if the water that he's drinking water is already too low, then I would use the other copper sulfate, right? That's really the answer. It's not, it really depends on what your water quality is. So.
All right. Here's another one that says, I feed a 3-part flock raiser, 1 part 5-grain scratch, grit, Rapido, and vegetable oil. In the cold winter, will some extra corn hurt to keep them warm and not make them fat?
It will not. Now, the threshold for what I consider cold is I would not give any extra corn until you are below your 24-hour average, daytime, nighttime combined, right? Until your 24-hour average is, I would not add corn until you're below 40 degrees. Okay. And then you're only talking about a quarter of an ounce to a half an ounce of extra corn per day to do that. Don't get carried away. Okay. Corn is like ice cream. When you open it up, it's too easy to eat the whole damn thing. So just go a little bit goes a long way. So I have no problem with supplementing with a little bit of corn, in the coldest part of the year. But the birds are actually, with all the plumage on them and, everything else going on with them, they are quite comfortable down to that 40-degree, kind of average 24-hour temperature. And
Mm-hmm.
I see way too many people start jumping the gun and they start, adding corn when it gets below 50 or 60 degrees. And it's too early, way too early.
All right, I got another question for you. What is
Okay.
the best way to build the body on a bird back that was sick?
Yeah, you really got to focus on not only your protein, but you got to focus on your amino acids. And so it's almost actually you're going back to feeding like a chick starter feed where you want to be in the 20 to 22% protein range, with those exceptionally high amino acids because you want to get the muscle back first, right? And there's plenty of energy in that feed, you know, to build back. There's plenty of energy and carbohydrates in a chick starter feed, um, but I need that protein to really build them back. And protein is what's going to heal the internal organs from whatever was sick. So the bird's need for protein is going to be considerably higher when it's healing from any type of illness.
Okay. A
Right?
lot of people have heard us talk about freezing or, getting a lot of people will buy the 40-pound bag of Rapido
Mm-hmm.
and they'll put some in a baggie or a mason jar and then they'll put the rest of it in the deep freeze
Right.
because that extends the life of everything that goes in the Rapido. One of the questions that I got was, am I able to freeze feed to help keep it fresh?
Yeah. Yeah. So when we freeze Rapido, I'm comfortable with it actually going up to almost 2 years. Okay. From date of manufacturing, which is on every bag, right? We put that on there.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can freeze the Rapido and go almost 2 years. Okay. Keep it airtight. Freezing, it's only part of it. Okay. The other part is squeeze out the air. Like if you put it in 2-pound baggies and you vacuum sealed it, that would be ideal, right? Then I can say 2 years, I don't have a problem. If you're just going to put it in there kind of loose and floppy with the bag open, you're probably going to extend it to a year. Okay. Keeping air out of it is the primary concern. Okay. So we're trying to keep the oxygen down and we want to keep the bacteria from getting active. So, so feed, yeah, I can stretch feed out past 6 months if from the date it was made. If it goes into a freezer, again, minimizing the amount of air that actually contacts those carbohydrates and those nutrients, we can stretch feed out to a year, airtight packaging in a freezer, and it's great.
If I leave grit free choice, will they overeat it?
Nope, nope. They know exactly how much they need. Now, if you think they're overeating it, your grit size may be too small. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
like a full-size game fowl, the grit should be, the stone should be about 1/4 of an inch wide and almost 3/8 of an inch long. Okay, so it's a pretty good size. It's almost the size of pea gravel. It's got pretty good size to it. So if you're feeding starter grit or grower grit, which grower grit's down, it's under 1/4 of an inch in both directions,
Right.
it won't stay in the gizzard as long, and it'll come out the other side, and you'll start seeing stones in their manure. But if you have the right size grit, it'll stay in there for a long time. And I just did some math for another group the other day, and I would estimate about 1 ounce, 1 to 1.5 ounces of grit per adult chicken per month is about the safe estimate. So if they're going through more than that, then you need to up the size. But that should be about right. Between 1 to 1.5 ounces per month for, an adult, a full grown, year-old plus hen or cock.
And that doesn't matter what kind of rocks you got in your cock yard, what kind of rocks you got in your fly pen, what kind of rocks you got where your tie cords are. That's not grit.
No.
There's a lot of people say, well, I live in an area that's got a lot of rocks. Well, unless you're in Vermont and one or two other places in the world where they do have the right kind of rocks, you don't have grit unless you scoop it up in a feed scoop and toss it where your chickens can get it. That's the only way you got enough on the ground. Here's another one that I got. I've actually got this question or some variants of it 4 different times. A good feed for game fowl. What should be the guaranteed analysis levels on the protein, the fat, the lysine, and the fiber, and the methionine?
All right. So without knowing specific regions or anything, I like an 18 protein.
Mm-hmm.
I want a fat level above 5. I want a fiber level at 5, between 5 and 6. I want a lysine at least 1.1. I want a methionine at 0.48 to 0.52. What else did I missing? So if they're not laying, I want a calcium at 1.1%, give or take, 0.25.
Right.
Sodium level needs to be at least 0.18, not salt, sodium. Right. Salt level ought to be 0.4 to 0.6. Everything else they don't have to guarantee on the label. So, I can give you all the numbers you want, but
you won't see them.
You won't see them. And if you ask for them, they're not going to tell you. You're going to scare your feed mill guy if you ask too many questions. So,
yeah, he'll think you're a fad. What's better to feed? More pellets, more grains? There's lots of arguments for both sides. That's another question that I've gotten quite a bit.
Best feed is going to be 3/4 grain, 1/4 pellet, but it's hard to get that 36% protein pellet, unless I can talk you into making more of it. But there was a 36%. There was a 36% protein pellet that had had the Rapido already built into it, had the poultry nutrients or the fish meal, all the soybean, all the calcium, all the alfalfa. It was all wrapped up into one. And then you could do 1/4 pellet, protein pellet, and 3/4, mixed grain. And that was an awesome way to feed. So that's my personal preference. That's the way to feed them. Okay. The only reason I don't like pellets is they have to put byproducts in there for the pellet to get hard. Okay. You can't make a good hard pellet without adding bullshit. Sorry. That's the truth of it, right? You got
It
to
is what
add
it
wheat
is.
middlings, right? You got to add wheat middlings, or you got to add grain dust, or you got to add something to get that pellet to form and get hard. And they also can't get the fat levels I talked about a second ago up above 5 or 6 in a pellet, because fat level gets above 4, it doesn't want to make a good pellet. The pellet won't hold together. So if you want a pellet, you're giving up quality. There's just no way around that one. So
And when it's not a pellet, they digest it better.
absolutely.
All right, got quite a few questions about pokeberries. They're this time of year, the wild birds eat them. Are they great natural dewormer? They'll store in the freezer as well. Good, bad, indifferent. One person says that their birds seem to really enjoy them. So tell us about those. Tell us about pokeberries.
Now, look, I am just learning about pokeberries, and thank you, Mr. Dwayne Ard, for turning me on to pokeberries. I am not the expert, so he learned me that pokeberries, if harvested and processed correctly, are an excellent painkiller. The seeds can be poisonous, so how the birds are getting away with it, I don't know. But yeah, I agree. Certain birds, not all birds, but certain birds, I see at the pokeberry plants, and how many they're eating every day, I don't know.
So from
I
what
have
I've
not.
seen, they are mildly toxic, but I
Yep.
think it's kind of like sulfur. Up to a certain level is okay for the bird, and it helps ward off mites and things like that. So, maybe that's
I,
like where the bird knows not to eat too much grit,
right.
and
I
they
I
know.
haven't learned what the toxic component of pokeberries are yet to know if it's a natural dewormer or not. So
Right.
I just, chickens will eat some of the strangest things. When I had my chickens, I would take coal ash out there. Friend had a coal burning stove. I'd take coal ash out there and dump it, and they'd eat it first. They'd all run over and they'd all eat it, right?
Yeah.
And then once everybody got their dose of coal ash, which is going to be high in sulfur, right? Then they dust bathe in it, right? And they loved it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it was awesome stuff. And so if you got a wood burner or a coal burner, doesn't matter. It makes excellent dusting material, keeps mites and lice off your birds. So
I got to ask this one to get you excited.
don't do it.
Hebron,
Come on.
Heberville, Texas. What type of medication is best to use to prevent coccidiosis?
None.
None.
None. You keep clean bedding, keep clean ground, keep clean bedding, lime your yard 2, 3 times a year. And if you
Feed in a
can,
feed cup.
yeah. And
Don't throw your feet on the ground.
if you can get your chicks, some whole milk. It doesn't have to be raw, but if you can get them some whole milk on days 3, 7, 14, 21, and 28, that will get you past coccidiosis stage. Okay. So again, day 3, day 7, day 14, day 21, day 28. And if you give them what they'll clean up in about 2 hours of whole milk, that will ward off coccidiosis. And they've been doing this. I didn't make this shit up, people. Okay. They researched this in California, Chino State, real professors before the money told them what the results they had to have in 1930. Okay. And if you want to see that document, I'll be more than happy to share it with you. But they've been using whole milk to treat coccidiosis for 100 years.
Yep. And now I will say this, the main thing that is used like in chick feed and stuff like that is amprolium. And
Right.
the bad thing about it is that it blocks chicks from using thiamine, which is an essential vitamin essential to vitamin B1 that affects the metabolic energy supply, growth, development, everything else that happens over the first 8 to 10 weeks of that chick's life. You pretty much stunting its growth by giving it that. So that's the deal behind it.
Well, we got lots of questions. So
yeah, so a lot of people are talking about granite for grit. One person says oyster shell should be good, but oyster shell is not grit. That is calcium carbonate. Let's see. Can you overdo it with Rapido? Yes.
You can. I just don't know what that level is. Okay. I've got people doing it at twice the dose and they're still happy. What you're going to see when you start overdoing it is you're going to start to see frayed and curly hackle feathers.
Mm-hmm.
You keep pushing it much harder than that, and they're going to want to crawl right out of their skin. So not just the B vitamin levels in there and what Rapido does to their metabolism. There is no need to overdo it. No need. Just keep that, teaspoon a day is really a perfect amount. Okay.
I mean,
If they're not
you want
feeling good.
athletes, not crackheads.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. You want an athlete, not a crackhead.
Yeah. Don't be calling me because you got a man fighter that you've been overfeeding Rapido. So
let's see.
I don't want that.
Douglas says, what about kerosene for lung and throat worms?
As far as I know, it works. I do not have any personal experience with it. Okay. But yeah, the gape worm in the throat, there's not a whole lot that's going to get it once that gape worm is formed there and you start seeing the bird gasping for air. You might as well try the kerosene. But I do not have firsthand experience using kerosene, so I can't answer that question.
All right. I've seen some guys feed raw ground beef to chicks. Would you recommend it?
Yeah, I actually like raw ground liver better because it has more vitamins in it, and it has way more nutrients and iron. So and you probably can buy liver at the store cheaper than you can ground beef right now. So I would probably go get liver and just chop it up, and it doesn't take a lot. So you're
Pete
talking about
says,
it. Yeah,
go ahead.
No,
I was saying, Pete says, what happens if you don't refrigerate Rapido? You just keep it in the bag that it came in, but not refrigerated.
Nothing. I only guarantee it. When I made it for Douglas and when I make it for Carrie, I beat it into everybody's head. Right, 6 months. Okay, it has a 6-month shelf life because I will not use preservatives. Okay, don't ask me to. It ain't gonna happen. I'll tell you to go buy somewhere else. I will not use a chemical preservative on anything that I manufacture.
Right. All right, I got a question I'm going to answer right here for Dwayne. I've lost 124 pounds and I'm stuck at the same weight for 5 weeks now. How much Rapido do I need to cut fat? Dwayne, I'm going to suggest 2 tablespoons a day because you're a pretty big bird.
Yeah.
But that's good. He's lost a lot of weight and it's been on purpose. He's not, nothing's wrong with him. And I am proud of him for losing that.
Yeah.
Douglas asked, do you recommend feeding table scraps or fruit?
I do. I have no problem with table scraps. And it's just, I would probably give it to my free range birds. To me, feeding fruit is maybe a moisture control tool. And there's a time and a place for the fruit. I don't know that I get a whole lot out of the fruit on a regular ongoing basis, but I tell you what, it is funny as shit to watch chickens eat watermelon. So if you get a watermelon that ain't right or got old in the fridge, you put that out for your free range birds. They can eat watermelon better than any human I've ever seen in my life.
So in the summertime in the South, I'll actually get watermelons, and I do it just to feed my birds. Real quick, when is Rapido going to be available for purchase in Mexico? I am actually working with a distributor right now that is in California that is in the process of setting up that transportation. We've got some paperwork we've got to get filled out and get approved to get it across the border legally. And we're working through that hurdle, but we are working on export to Mexico and to Canada. So it's coming. Let's see. Does activated charcoal work on disease in younger or older birds?
Your question on the board is from Pete, and
I didn't see that pop up.
And he no, Pete, you do not have to toss it.
Yeah, don't do that.
There's still a lot of really good in the Rapido. Okay. We've started losing some of the B vitamins at this age. That's the only thing I'm worried about. I want to try and point a bird or bring a bird, through conditioning and training. It's still great, for the older hens, the older cocks, and the grow outs. But if you got to work some birds coming up, I would get some fresh on hand for those guys.
Let's see. What would recommend to get rid of extra fat?
Cut back on how much you're feeding, Victor. Come on, man.
Yep.
Put them on a tie cord. Put them in a fly pen. But
exercise
probably, them. Yep, you're probably feeding them too much. So.
Dwayne said that his free range birds go crazy over cooked brown rice.
Yep.
Too, especially with peas and carrots in
it. Yep.
What percentage of a chicken's body is water? That's another question I've seen.
Yeah. 69 to 70%. And yet, no matter how much I preach, I cannot get people to check their water quality. Every day, a chicken consumes twice as much water as it does feed by weight. Water is more important than the feed. Okay? Get the water right, and many things in your life will get better.
For me, people say weird things about it, but I've actually I use RV water filters. I have 3 of them in line on my hoses that go out in my courtyard. And so I'm on city water, and I triple filter it going out there. Let's see. Douglas asked if we're offering capsules now. Rapido Red is on the website, and it is available in the U.S. and several other areas as well. Let's see. Here's another question that I've seen quite a bit. We've only got a couple minutes left. Jeff, do you treat respiratory? What is your opinion?
Yeah. I mean, if you can catch it early enough, again, I'm coming at it all from the herbal side. If you can catch it early enough, there's some really good herbal stuff for cleaning up respiratory, but you've got to get it before it really lodges in the body. You got to catch it early, right? You got to be paying attention. First time you hear a sneeze or a snit, or you see anything coming out of the eyes or nostrils, you got to be on it. It's not tomorrow. It's today. It's right now, right? And you got to be ready to go. So.
All right. Last question. The old timers used to say feeding raw tomatoes would cut fat. Is that true?
I honestly don't know. With the high lycopene in a tomato, the acidity of the tomato, I can believe that to be true. It makes sense in my head, but I have not experienced that, So I'm learning a lot tonight. I'm going to have to get some tomatoes and feed some chickens, see what happens.
Guys, we appreciate it. We love you guys. We'll talk to you next week.